All right, let's talk about paragraphs, people. So, if you're watching this video, I assume that you have looked at the like PDF linked to above me that kind of shows like the basic elements of a paragraph, and then there's a sample. We're going to take a look at that sample, and then we're also going to look at a paragraph that a student handed in for the Bachman essay that's like got some strengths and some weaknesses that I think might be helpful for you to hear about as you are beginning to draft that essay and you're thinking about paragraph structure as you put together that draft. All right, so here's that paragraph that you've already looked over, but I just wanted to point out that this top section and the bottom section are bolded because those are the places in the paragraph where the author really makes clear what their point is. So the one at the top is the topic sentence section where they tell you what the point of the paragraph is. And then down here where it's called the explanation section, or at least I call it the explanation section, is where the writer explains what the evidence that they've just presented means and how it relates to the point that they brought up at the beginning of the paragraph, okay? So those bolded places are at the beginning and the end, and I think of it as like the paragraph coming full circle. Like you introduce an idea up here, you present evidence for it here, specific examples to illustrate your idea, and then you bring it home and kind of clarify how that evidence supports the point that you started off in the first place, okay? And then I wanted to say that most of my students are pretty comfortable with this idea of a topic sentence that they have to say, what their point is. They are comfortable with the fact that they have to bring in evidence, but the explanation part is not the majority of the time, but many times it can be missing from the paragraphs that I read. And I think that's because it's the hard part, right? Like, just putting in typing in a quote is pretty easy, but explaining what exactly that quote has to do with the point that you're trying to make is the hard part. And so people don't want to do it and they just don't do it. But yeah, you have to tell your reader what your evidence shows. Like, how does it logically prove the point that you're trying to make? Okay, that's what you're trying to do in that explanation section, and it's a very important section of paragraphs. And then I want to show you, we'll move on to a paragraph that a student wrote, and yeah, it's got some problems and some strengths. All right, so this paragraph starts off pretty strong with like a very clear topic sentence. And I think in this paragraph, I should explain that this paper overall is arguing that Bachman should be held responsible mainly. And in this paragraph, I think their intention was to try and consider like an alternate view, to consider the gray areas or an opposing viewpoint that might contradict their position that Bachman should be held pretty much completely responsible. That's my guess. It has some good ideas, but they're just not fully developed. And so, yeah, let's take a look. So they start off with another factor that seems to be a part of Bachman's addiction is the government. How could a government allow a system where addiction is profited off to be allowed to be legal? It is a system that solely profits off making sure you spend as much money as possible for as long as possible. So all that stuff is about the government. They don't really explain how the government profits, and I think that's an important piece that's missing if they wanted to go that route of criticizing the government. But then, right here it begins to break down because they've got this quote that doesn't really have anything to do with the government. It says, Harrah's gave her a line of credit so she wouldn't have to carry cash. And really, from then on, not till the end of the paragraph, but for a while, it's clear that they're talking about the casino's actions, and it's not clear what that has to do with the government, okay? And I should also point out with that quote, they didn't introduce the quote. It's just sort of like hits the reader in the face. It's a dropped quotation where they didn't say like something like, according to Duhigg, Hera's, etc. So they need some improvement in the way they're working with sources and incorporating the evidence into the paragraph. And then it goes on. This made it easier for her to get about her debt and continue her numb feeling throughout the addiction. To originally hook Andy up unto spending money, they sent her coupons for free buffets. She would treat the family to dinner on Saturday nights. This made it extremely easy to ignore the downsides and only view the benefits of spending her money here. And all of that, I think, is great evidence, but it's about the casinos and their manipulative strategies, okay? It's not about the government. And then the idea that Angie was captive to her own body is compelling. And that's an interesting way of putting it, like that she was so addicted that she was physically addicted and didn't have any control over her behavior. But I think the wording there is not very clear. The reader will not maybe quite know what you mean by captive to her own body, okay? Yet without solid evidence of her lack of certain neurotransmitters, how can anyone know for sure? It is suspended in time as a speculation. And so I think this person is trying to refute the idea that the casinos or the government could be considered guilty parties here, but it's just not done super clearly. But I can see where they're trying to go, and I do think they have some good ideas. But yeah, I think this is also a good example of a paragraph that's rough, and when you review each other's papers, when we do the drafts and the peer review next week, this is the type of stuff I want you to point out about other people's papers. I want you to be like, hey, you started off that paragraph talking about government, and then you were like kind of all over the place, because that's what people need to hear. So I think this person just started off with a clear idea of what they wanted to talk about, and then they just got lost halfway through. And you have to be more disciplined with controlling your paragraph. You have to think about, okay, I've got a topic sentence, I've got evidence that relates to that, and then I've got to have explanation at the end that connects those pieces, connects the evidence to the overall point or topic sentence of the paragraph. Okay? Oh, and then everything should also connect back up to the thesis, the overall point of the essay. Anyways, hope this is helpful. I know this video is kind of long, so thanks for hanging in there with me. Happy paragraph writing.